as a result of us having Zoom meetings is now we have the ability to maybe reach out to some of the individuals who have been part of our community and are a part of kind of the history of our community where we wouldn't have been able to have them before live and in person. So I know we were looking for some folks a couple weeks back, and I thought to myself, who isn't around anymore, comes back here and there and is kind of part of the, kind of a small part of the history of Edwardsville. So I thought of our guest here. He was born and raised in Edwardsville, was on the first of 3 state baseball championship teams under Tom Pyle, 2 under Tom Pyle, and then the 3rd under one of our guests today, Coach Funkhauser. After playing baseball at the University of Memphis in college, he was drafted by the Texas Rangers in the 8th round of the 1994 amateur draft. We'll get into the details of his career. He can get into the details of his career, but I'll go over the first couple of years where he played 4 years in the Rangers minor league system, getting as high as AAA before being traded on August 9th, 1998, along with Darren Oliver and Mr. Fernando Tatis to the St. Louis Cardinals for Royce Clayton and Todd Stottlemyre, some familiar names there. He was assigned to the Cardinals AAA affiliate, Memphis Redbirds, before making his major league debut on September 12th, 1998, which was a historic year for baseball in the St. Louis Cardinals, and we can touch on that too. And in 2000, he led the AAA Memphis Redbirds with 22 stolen bases. He retired after the 2006 season after playing for the Florida Marlins AAA affiliate. And then he went on to get into medical surgical equipment sales, and he'll touch on that. He is married to his high school sweetheart, Charity, who is the eldest daughter of Jeff Lance, who is a home builder here in town. And so I know they come back to town here and there throughout the year. And he has a daughter named Ryan, who just graduated from high school, and she is an athlete in her own right. And then he has a son named Jack, who I believe will be a junior this year in high school. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. Mark Little. Yay. Might want to unmute yourself, Mark.
Oh, I can unmute myself. Unfortunately, I'm no rookie to Zoom, but sorry to unmute myself quicker. So to solve your problem with the meeting, you guys they have patio furniture at Lowe's. And so you could just have a meeting at Lowe's in the patio furniture section or Home Depot and it's funny, I went into the Lowe's in Houston the other day and I said, has anybody in your store been sick? And they said, nobody. And I said, isn't that crazy? Like all these people have been in and out of this store for the last 85 days and nobody got sick in your store. And they're like, yeah, it's crazy. So they're immune to it at Lowe's and Home Depot. So problem solved. But yeah, it's good to see Tim on this call today. I did a brief interview with Matt Camp with the Intelligencer. And so it was kind of neat to kind of reminisce. It was funny after I had talked about, our state run in 1990. I reached out to Tim Ciesla, who was actually the opposing pitcher in that state championship game. And he had thrown, I think Funky could tell you, but I think he threw 7 innings in a semifinal game earlier that day and then threw 7 innings in that championship game. And I mean, which is just crazy that a guy throws 14 innings in a day. But I reached out to him. We played a little bit of phone tag, but it's kind of neat to, still have some sort of connection with an opposing team after all these years. So definitely a special time I know Tim and I, and it was fun to watch the replay of it on that IHSA. They had uploaded a lot of championship games on YouTube. So it was pretty neat to get on there. And my dad passed away in 2010. And so there were multiple times you could see, my dad and, like old shots of my mom and, my wife when she was back in high school and, a bunch of different people. So it was pretty special.
You guys are pretty small, I noticed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, steroids will make you a lot stronger and bigger. I think booze during this pandemic has tended to add a couple of pounds to a little bit of everybody. And it's funny how you kind of felt like you were on vacation for the first like month that this all went down. You could like gradually see your coworkers gaining weight. But you know, it's definitely something. I mean, I had made a comment, I think on Twitter, that I don't remember our swings being that bad. Like, I don't know what kind of stance I had or what kind of approach it was. Like, it's amazing that I could hit with what I was seeing. I mean, I see these kids nowadays, you know, and all the lessons that they've had. And, you know, I just feel like these kids these days are so much better equipped than we were, you know, coming up. So, I mean, we were thankful to have Moto and Mike Waldo and Daryl Butler. But I was kind of embarrassed to show my son my at-bats in that game. So Funky looked better. I'll say that. Funky looked better than I did.
Why don't you talk about, well, we can go back and forth a little bit. In fact, yeah. I was going to hold some of the questions, but we can go back and forth because that'll add a little spice to it. So one of the things you brought up was, you know, nowadays kids have the best equipment possible, the best tutorials possible, online, personalized training, things like that. And you and I talked on the phone a couple weeks back, and there has been some amazing players that have come through Edwardsville. And you didn't have the luxury of all those things. You had Little League, and you had, you know, just, you know, maybe some summers playing sandlot ball. And yet you were the most accomplished major leaguer to come out of Edwardsville. You know, what makes it a little bit harder now, or what's the differences that you see between whenever you were growing up playing and what is going on now that makes it almost that much harder to come through?
I don't know. I mean, I have made the comment multiple times, and I think Tim can attest to this, that, I mean, there are so many gifted and talented people. I think a lot, and I'm not saying like I have all the perseverance and determination in the world, but I feel like that is the biggest hurdle that most people have to overcome is you're going to fail. And it's how you deal with that failure that is the difference maker, especially when you get to the professional level and, you know, you're playing, I mean, in the minor leagues, I mean, you're not a part of the union. And so you play a 144 game schedule and you might get a day off a month. And so I remember at one point in the minor leagues playing 36 days in a row, and it was maybe 36 games and 34 days. Like there were two different instances where we played double headers. And I mean, it's pretty easy to like go 0 for 4 in a game and then turn around and go 0 for 4 the next day. And you start stringing together a couple of days like that. And next thing you know, you've just gone, 0 for 24, and you just watch your average drop, 40 points, and that it's devastating. And I feel like there are so many kids. I did spend 1 year as a roving outfield and base running coordinator for the Brewers. And I remember being in a meeting in spring training, and they were talking about a guy who was drafted in the 4th round and had all the tools in the world and just was unable to kind of put it together mentally. And one of the player development guys said, he was always the best player on, every team that he was ever a part of until now. And I just kind of raised my hand and said, that's everybody. I mean, that's everybody in professional baseball. So he's got to get over that really quick, because the difference is, really what's between your ears. It's getting in the box and competing and just saying, I mean, I might not have the best swing, but you're not going to beat me. You're not. It turns into I laugh all the time with my wife because I signed 13 one-year contracts, and I didn't retire in 2006. I quit. You retire when you got 10 years of service in the big leagues. I had 2.5 years of service in the big leagues. So I'm a quitter, and that's the only thing I've ever quit. But it was, you're putting food on the table for your family, and you're taking every offer really personally. And I think the people who make it are the people that, just persevere. And I will attribute a lot of that to getting my butt beat with a belt when I was a kid. and getting hit with switches, because that tends to create a little bit of determination in you. So
yeah. Well, and it's interesting how a lot of what you said applies to success now, regardless of your career.
right.
And it just shows that there's just a lot of talent out there in general, and how you persevere mentally is the key to success, regardless of if it's baseball or law or whatever it is. So
Yeah,
that's
life. Yeah, I
interesting
mean,
to say that.
yeah, it is. It's a and I feel like I've coached a lot of kids, and you can tell who they are. I mean, and it's not like, you have a team of 12 kids on a youth baseball team and you can, like, point to 6 or 7 of them. I mean, it's usually 1 or 2 that you can really look at and say, I mean, they're a good athlete, but there's just something about it when they get in the box, or the lights come on, or the heat gets turned up in the kitchen a little bit, and they just say, look, you're not going to beat me. I'm going to win in this situation. And I know Tim could probably, go through years of people since 1999 that, we're that person. And sometimes they're not the most physically gifted people. I don't feel like I was the most physically gifted. I think it was in the right place at the right time. So I think what Michael Jordan's always said, that like success is like an intersection of luck and hard work. I think that a lot of that goes into it. But it's definitely, what I've always said is, the sooner you figure out that you're not a baseball player, the better off you are, because you better then get really serious about making good grades in school and figuring out what you're going to do in the future, because it's hard. I mean, I played 13 years and I got out of baseball and walked into an operating room. And so I was fortunate, but it's tough to start your career over at 34 years old.
Mm-hmm. So we're actually, it's kind of fortuitous that we're meeting today. Today is day 2 of the Major League Draft. So if you can, you're drafted in the 8th round, and typically there's 40 rounds or so.
Like back then, there was there wasn't a number. I mean, if the Chicago White Sox wanted to keep drafting people, they could draft 70 people, and then they changed that rule. And Tim can probably tell you the exact time when it was changed, but then it went to 40. And then obviously right now it's just, 5 rounds. And I can see it moving forward, keeping it to a really low number. I think they set up the rule this year that if you sign somebody as a free agent, I think they get $20,000, which is, pretty amazing. Because I mean, back in the day, they would say, I'll give you $500 and a cup of coffee, and people would take that and they would go play. So,
well, yeah, tell us about, if you can,
remember
recall,
back then?
Yeah, remember way back when, what was that like, finding out that you got drafted, and what did the next several weeks consist of? Because I think you get right on a plane and you go to somewhere, a rookie camp somewhere, and just, you talk about, looking back at your high school years and, what kind of swing did you have? I know you had some mentoring and some good, instruction at University of Memphis, but, going into that minor league camp or that rookie ball camp, what was your recollection as far as like, wow, I'm in over my head, or I just need to push myself? What was your thoughts?
Yeah, well, let me back up just a little bit on that timeline, because I wanted to play basketball and baseball in college. And so I had some opportunities to go to schools that didn't really have very good baseball programs, but they wanted me to play basketball. And I was really tied up into wanting to play both sports. And Tim and I were laughing about this because, I pitched in that state championship game. And that's one of the reasons why I ended up like getting an opportunity to play baseball, because all of a sudden people thought, well, this guy can pitch too. And when money is tight in baseball anyway, I mean, there's 11.7 scholarships. That's the maximum number of scholarships at a university you can have. The ability, to be able to, play a position and pitch, makes you a little bit, I mean, it's
more valuable.
Way more valuable. Yep. And so I didn't know where I was going to school until August, before, we enrolled like 3 weeks later. So, and I went to a junior college. I went to Lakeland College first.
That's right.
And then after my freshman year, I had a good freshman year, and I got an offer to go to Memphis. And that was the only offer I had. I had an opportunity to go to St. Louis University, but they didn't. I mean, I think at that time they only had like 3 scholarships. And so the money that I was going to get was, the monies were few and far between. And I was going to come out of college with a lot of debt. And Memphis offered me a 86% scholarship. And I thought, man, to leave school and not have any debt, I'm going to do it. So I took the first opportunity and ran with it. But coming off of that, my junior year I had a good year and I didn't get drafted. And then my senior year, I had an even better year. We went to the regional. We were in the Oklahoma State regional back when they only had, there were 8 regionals, but only 6 teams made it. So there were 48, it was a 48 team format. And so I guess technically you could say that we got 3rd place in that regional, just based on who we beat. Cal State Fullerton ended up advancing, but we were playing in that tournament right up to the draft. And so, there wasn't any coverage of the Major League Baseball draft back then. I knew I didn't get drafted the first day because nobody called me. And then on the second day, I got a call from a guy who was kind of acting as my, agent, this guy, Bo McInnes. And he was really tied in with the Rangers organization. And so he contacted me and said, you got drafted in the 8th round. My dad had an apartment in a millwork business that he had down in Pontoon Beach. And so I just remember being up in his apartment and getting this call and the guy basically telling me, this is what they're going to give you to sign. You could hold out all summer and get them to finish paying for the rest of your school. But I had an NCAA 5th year scholarship that, I would get my school paid for, but I would have to come back and do like work study or, be a, assistant coach or, some sort of like non-paid assistant coach to help out or cut the grass at the field, whatever they decided to do. But, ended up, signing, no negotiation, signing that contract, left maybe 5 days later and drove to Poughkeepsie, New York and started my first season of pro ball.
Did you feel
which was crazy because that was the year of the strike. If people remember back in 1994. So it was a really crazy time because, as soon as the strike happened, the players stopped. All resources to us as minor leaguers went away, and we didn't have any bats. We didn't have baseballs. I remember our GM kind of scrambling around so that we could play games. And, then going into my first spring training, the players were still on strike and there were replacement players and, everybody was calling them scabs. And, you're being asked by, the people who do, write your check because you're not in the union, asking you to cross a picket line and you're telling them no. So it was a pretty baseball was in a bad space the first year that I played. But I think it was good because I realized that I wasn't going to play baseball. As soon as I felt like there was something else I could do and do it better, I was done because, I wasn't going to sit around and I wanted to play the game and leave the game on my own terms. And I feel like I did that.
Very good. Well, let's fast forward a couple of years. Again, it's timely because I believe there's a new 30 for 30 coming out about the summer of 1998.
Yeah,
long gone summer, where the home run chase between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. And so I can remember it pretty clear. I remember Mike Shannon announcing when Mark Little in August of 98 during that home run chase. I remember him talking about Mark entering the game and being from Edwardsville. So he for the home runs that McGwire hit those last month and a half of the season or so. I'm sure you've told these stories probably hundreds of times by now, but tell us about
Here's the story nobody knows. Here's the story that nobody knows about that.
This is what we want to hear. We want the exclusive.
So this is a good story. So I know that you've probably stayed the night at my in-laws' house on Lance Court. I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if there's many people in Edwardsville that have not, that either know my sister-in-law, Carissa, my brother-in-law, Justin McFarland, my, brother-in-law, Jeff Lance. if you know them in some way,
Right.
you've stayed the night at their house. I mean, they never
Right.
locked their door. I mean, I slept many a night on their couch, but
Sometimes it was out of necessity because you didn't want to be a menace to other drivers, but whatever. Go
yeah, yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Well, that's another story. That's
Right.
another
Right.
Zoom call.
Yeah.
So I had pulled my hamstring at the end of that season in Memphis, and we were, one or two games out of the playoffs, half game out. I mean, every game was important. And I ended up pulling my hamstring like late in a game one night. And so when we were finally out of it, I remember getting called into Galen Pitts' office. He was our manager. And he was a third base coach for Joe Torre when Torre was the manager of the Cardinals. And so Galen said, hey, Mark, we're going to call you up, but it's contingent upon you passing a physical, whether or not we're going to activate you. And so I was kind of like, I was disappointed because, I mean, my leg was bad. And then he also says right after that, he goes, and I have to ask you another favor. He said, do you think that JD Drew can stay with you when you go back home? And I said, well, I don't have a home in Edwardsville, but I'm staying at my in-laws. And my wife and I were just engaged at the time, but I'm pretty sure that he can stay the night there. But they were like, yeah, because there's no hotel rooms in St. Louis because McGuire was breaking the record. And I mean, they could not get a hotel room for JD. So I'm pretty sure that I got called up because they needed a place for JD Drew to stay the night, which the other side of that is anybody, and JD ended up sleeping in Carissa's bed. She had a twin bed, and any person that ever slept in her bed hurt their back. And because JD stayed at the house for a couple of nights or whatever it was, he ended up hurting his back. And I ended up getting a start against Chris Peters. He was a left-handed pitcher that was with the Expos and the Pirates. But I ended up getting a start in a game because JD couldn't go because he'd hurt his back sleeping in Chris's bed. So, I got my first hit that night, and so I owe a lot to my sister-in-law for that one.
That's a great story. What do you remember about the chaos of the whole McGuire thing? Just, I mean, you don't even have to get into Mark, what Mark McGuire had to go through, but just what was going on around you and the team and everybody.
It was crazy because, I was sitting in the dugout and I was every 5 minutes during a game, somebody from Edwardsville, somebody that I went to junior college with would yell into the dugout like, "Hey, psycho!"
Which was your nickname?
Don't know. Yeah,
that was your nickname, yes.
Yeah, nickname in high school. But so guys would, in the middle of the game, would just come in, and as soon as they would yell at me, like Willie McGee, I sat with Willie McGee a lot. He would go, "Don't big league that guy. Go up and talk to him." Like they were like trying to get me to, during the game, get up and go talk to somebody. So that was always kind of crazy. The other funny story about that time was David Howard, who was a utility middle infielder that had come over from the Royals. He kind of took me underneath his wing and, was telling me like, you can do this on the plane. This is where you should sit. Always grab a trash bag full of beer, bring it on the bus, make sure there's beer from the bus to the hotel. And so, he told me to do something, I would do it. And so he would always talk to me. And I remember one game him saying, "I'm so excited for you. You're going to get your first hit in the big leagues." And it was kind of one of those times where I'm sure everybody on this call's had that, when somebody's talking to you or saying something to you, but they're expecting you to then like ask them a question like, "Well, hey, who did you get your first hit off of?" And I didn't know who David Howard was. I'm not a big baseball historian. And so David Howard, I felt like he wanted me to ask him who he got his first hit in the big leagues off of, but he had rotator cuff surgery that year in '98, and I thought he was a pitcher. He's kind of a 6'1", skinnier guy. I didn't know him as a position player, and I thought, well, he's not a starting pitcher because I think I would know him if he was a starting pitcher. I thought he was a relief pitcher, and so instead of me, and interleague play had just started at that point. So instead of me asking him who he got his first big league hit off of, I asked him if he had a hit in the big leagues. And he just was like, "Do I have a hit in the big leagues? Do I have a hit in the big leagues?" He's like, I hit a home run off of Nolan Ryan. Hell, I've hit 2 home runs off of Nolan Ryan. Do I have a hit in the big leagues? And he is like loud talking me in the dugout. And everybody is like paying attention to him and me. And he goes around and he tells Dave Parker. Dave Parker was one of the hitting coaches. It was him and Carney Lansford. He tells Dave Parker and tells Carney Lansford, tells Tony La Russa, and everybody in the dugout knows that I asked David Howard whether or not he had a hit in the big leagues. And so after the game, Tony, would always give his, little press conference, and I'm sitting at a table eating after the game, and Tony walks up to me and he says, "I'm going to get you a shirt that says IF on it." And I'm like, "If?" I'm like, "If for like just in case, like just in case I play," because I was ready to go into multiple games and never got an opportunity. And he goes, "No, not if for just in case." He's like, "If for idiot, F-U-C-K." And this is in the middle of the clubhouse, and everybody is like paying attention to this. And he's like, "Idiot, because you're a effing idiot." He's like, "How in the hell could you think David Howard didn't have a hit in the big leagues?" He said, "What, do you think he was 0 for 3,000? And I said, "Tony, I didn't think he was 0 for 3,000. I thought he was a pitcher. And why would he have hit? I knew he wasn't a starting pitcher." He goes, "That's worse. You're a idiot." And so anyway, I felt, about this big. I've got my thing on. And so after that, Willie McGee walked up to me and Willie said, "Hey, Mark, like, I didn't know who David Howard was until he got here." And he said, "I've been playing for 18 years. And I said, "Well, damn, Willie, it would have been nice if you would have stood up and defended me." And he goes, "Oh, I can't do that." But he said, "I just wanted you to know I didn't know who David Howard was either." So anyway,
well, it's pretty awesome at the very least that those are pretty respectable names that you've mentioned in that story. I don't know about David Howard, but between Dave Parker, and Carney Lansford, Tony La Russa, Willie McGee, that's pretty neat to be surrounded by those folks.
Yeah, no, it was neat. Willie, I told Willie, I said, "You were my favorite player growing up." And I think before I started to tell that story, because he knew that I was from a town right around St. Louis, but
sure,
I started to tell him, and he told me to shut up. And he said, go ahead. And I told him, I said, "You were my favorite player growing up." And he just kind of said, and he was such a humble person. But he said that I think when he had got traded from St. Louis to
Oakland,
I think he went to Oakland. And I was getting ready to say San Francisco, because there was a pitcher. There was a catcher that was with the A's and then went to, and I can't think of that guy's name. I want to say the last name is Decker, but he said that when he was in Oakland, that there was a young kid that had come up to him, and basically he started walking towards him, and the guy was a really big guy, and he thought, "Oh man, I hope I didn't say something stupid to this guy." And he said, "No," he said, "I just wanted you to know that, when I was a rookie and you were a veteran, you were very respectful to me. And, I just wanted to tell you thanks for, everything that you had done." So there are a lot of really, really good people in baseball. And
sure,
just like life and everything else, there are a lot of bad people. But, Willie McGee was one of the good guys for sure.
That's great. Well, we won't go through your entire career, but there was one story I wanted you to tell that I found interesting. So the teams that you played for, or let's rephrase that, the teams that you were a part of, and then we'll get to the question. So the St. Louis Cardinals, Colorado Rockies, New York Mets, Arizona Diamondbacks, Cleveland Indians. That was, I believe, the 5 teams, yes. So tell us about your stint on the New York Mets, and then tell us a story that you told me about how there's some pretty intense Mets fans out there in the world, and they make some requests of you.
Oh yeah. So I was a Met for 3 glorious days. And so I still get a lot of fan mail. Most of it is from Mets fans, requesting, autographs, because they're trying to have a autograph collection of all the Mets players that ever, put on a uniform. And so I was only there for 3 days and then got traded to the Diamondbacks. So it really wasn't I didn't have a baseball card that said I was a Mets person or, anything else. But I met a guy in Vero Beach, which if anybody's ever been to Vero Beach, when the Dodgers, Dodger Town, there are no dugouts. And so there's basically like picnic tables that players are sitting on with like umbrellas, and fans are just right there. And they're really, they have tons of access to you. And I was sitting on the bench probably an entire game until maybe like the 7th inning. And I sat and talked to this guy the whole time. And we're still friends. And he reached out to me and just said, "Hey, look, I'm trying to, make a baseball card of you in a Mets uniform. Do you have any pictures of you in a Mets uniform?" And I said, I don't, but there's a guy that was actually, there's a ton of just AP photographers that will take pictures, and a guy was there. And so I had received a couple of different pictures from him, and you could get on and buy it. And so the guy got access to his photos and basically made a New York Mets baseball card of me. And so I don't know, I have a handful of them, but every once in a while somebody writes a well thought out letter and writes legibly, then, I'll sign one of those Mets cards and put it in an envelope for them.
I just think that's fascinating because, you were on the Cardinals during an important time. You played in playoff games for which team?
Diamondbacks.
The Diamondbacks. And, obviously the Cardinals have a rich history. You played in the playoffs for the Diamondbacks. But yet the New York Mets fans, which you were a part of for 3 days, are the ones who are the most voracious, the ones that are fanatics.
Yeah, they are. And it's so funny because that was an interesting time because Jeremy Burnett, had just come off, a couple of really big years with the Brewers, and he could have gone anywhere. And he's from Southern California, and the Padres had offered him a pretty big contract, and he didn't take it. He chased the money, and he went to New York, and he was awful that first year in New York. I mean, I don't know if he hit above 200. Somebody could probably Google search it real quick, but I remember. Is
that who you were traded for?
No, I wasn't traded for.
I see.
I actually played. I see. I played. So during the induction ceremony in Cooperstown, they play a major league game. It's like an exhibition game. And so the year that I think it was Ozzie Smith got inducted, which was 2002.
Yes.
We played the White Sox in an exhibition game. And so I was a bench player for the Rockies at that time. And so I played in this game and went 5 for 5 and hit I don't know if I hit 3 home runs. It was a crazy day. It was like this,
wow.
Crazy game on a field, like a small field. But there was a Mets guy there that was John Thompson. He pitched in the game because the Mets wanted him. They needed a right-handed starter. And so I just happened to have this big game. And so John Thompson and I were traded for Jay Payton and Mark Corey. And the Mets really didn't have a fourth outfielder. They didn't have a defensive outfielder. So that's why I came over there. And unfortunately, while I was there, Edgardo Alfonso, John Valentin, and Ray Ordonez all got hurt in the same game.
Oh, wow.
And so they needed a middle infielder, and they said, "Can you play second base?" And I said, "Yeah, I can play second." And Bobby Valentine was like, "Well, when's the last time you played second base?" And I said, "High school, my freshman year." And so that was it. And I knew at that point that that I was done. And so I remember we had a doubleheader against the Diamondbacks, and I remember just sticking around afterwards because I knew that they were going to send me down or I was getting released. And I was the last person in the clubhouse. And what was Phillips's first name? Steve Phillips, is that right? He was the GM for the
sounds
Mets, right. And then he was an analyst on ESPN. But he was like, "Hey, Bobby wants to talk to you," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, whatever." And I walk into the office, and it's Bobby Valentine, Steve Phillips, and the Jay Horowitz, who was the traveling secretary. And they're like, we're going to outright you. We're going to take you off the roster. And there was some interest in you before the trade deadline. And so we think we can trade you, because you basically go on waiver wire for 6 days and they have an opportunity to pull you off, trade you, if somebody's interested. And then if not, then you have to like clear waivers for another 48 hours. And so they said, well, we'll just go back to the hotel and stick around. And they wanted me to stay for a week. And my daughter
Gosh.
was 6 months old at the time. And I said, nah, I think I'm going to go home. And they said, or you can go home. You can go home. They just don't want to pay for a flight if they don't have to pay for a flight. So I went back to St. Louis, and I was home for like 12 days because they were waiting for their AAA team to get to some city before I met up with them. And I played in Norfolk for 2 games and then got traded to the Diamondbacks. And so I think I was with 5 teams. So I was with the Rockies, the Mets, AAA Mets in Norfolk, then AAA Tucson. I was there for 2 weeks, and then I got called up to the big leagues. So in a span of a month or 5 weeks, I was with 5 teams.
Oh my goodness.
So it was pretty crazy. And that's what I said, people talk about, there is no such thing as security. And I got a wife in the other room that, drug 2 kids around with, us in multiple cities. So I think she gets it more than anybody.
Well, that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to end up with. So, obviously, I mean, that just goes to show just the kind of tumultuous lifestyle you had to lead to kind of just make it day by day. And that's the kind of thing that can wear on somebody, and that can obviously be a detractor if somebody, especially if they were the bright shining star for so many years growing up, and then they have to really grind to try to make it up. That's, like it just goes to show why a lot of folks kind of fizzle out. So,
yeah.
So you decided to retire and or quit, and then you obviously, you spent time raising your kids. So your daughter, Ryan, just graduated from high school, correct?
Correct.
And she is quite the athlete herself. Can you just give a little bit of background on that and what her future plans are?
Yeah, so she's going to the University of New Mexico. She's got a track scholarship, to go run there, which it was kind of fun because, in the end, it was between Rice and New Mexico where she was going to go. And New Mexico actually has a better track program than Rice. Rice is, you can look at all the schools. I mean, they're right up there. I think they're like 17th in the nation between like WashU. I think it's WashU, Rice. I mean, they call it the Harvard of the South, but I mean, I know some people who have some extremely intelligent kids, and they just say what a struggle it is. And so we kind of made a decision as a family. It's like, well, you can go there and, really focus on track. And they got a really, really nice indoor facility, and they do a great job with their medical staff and, just all the other opportunities that she had. And we didn't want her to go out of state, but, we really think she's in a good spot. So
that's great.
Yeah. And then Jack is a sophomore. And the funny thing is, both of them, all they ever talk about is wanting to come back to Edwardsville and go to school. My daughter was like, I think I'm going to go back to Edwardsville my senior year and run track. And Jack's like, I'm going to come back and play for Funky at Edwardsville. So,
well, the invitation stands. Well, one thing I wanted to, and I remember talking with your brother-in-law, Justin McFarland, and your sister-in-law about this, is if Ryan would have ran track in Edwardsville, she probably would have blown away times in Illinois. Is that correct?
Yeah. Like, I think she might have been a state champ her junior year if she would have run. I mean, obviously I think they're 3A for track, which I think is their biggest classification. But Texas is a totally different thing. I mean, she's like a 55-second 400 runner and a 11:83 100-meter runner. But she's fast. But there's people in Texas that are. It's ridiculous how fast
everything's bigger and better in Texas sometimes.
Exactly. You guys need to all come down. I worked for a Pritzker company, so they were crazy in the medical device world, and so I know that he's one heck of a governor you got going for you. So, there's open invitation in Texas. Anybody wants to come down?
Very good. Do you think Jack?
I do want to say I got a funny story too. Brian Mulhall's on this call, but Brian was a neighbor of Tim's. Before Tim moved. Brian might have moved now too, I don't know, but Funky wanted to put Christmas lights up one year, and so I was like the Christmas light guru in Gettysburg, and so I was trying to get Tim to get up on his roof, and so at one point, Tim was trying to come down off the ladder, and we didn't secure this extension ladder with like any, 2x4s. And so Tim fell off the second story of his house onto the first story, like porch. And I think Mulhall came running across the street telling us that we weren't very smart for doing this. But as soon as Brian got on to pray, which was a very beautiful prayer, that's all I could think about was watching Funky fall from that top floor of his house and me holding the extension ladder, and it just continued to extend. I can't do anything, and he just splatted on the front. I don't think I've laughed so hard in my life. I really don't. It's one of the funnier things I've ever seen.
You brought that on yourself. If you might be the Christmas guru, but you're a ladder moron, both of you.
Well, it's a lot of work to put a 2x4 on the roof. So
they put an extension ladder, the feet of the extension ladder, on the roof of the porch to get up to the second story. That's where it all started. And all I heard was this crash, absolute crash, and it was the extension ladder fell onto the ground, the metal extension ladder. I turn around, Tim's laying on the porch roof, flat on his back, not moving. Totally, just absolutely in fear and probably crying too.
He did not cry.
Hey,
and Mark,
I'm unmuting to defend myself. Now let's get it straight. Now, you learn a lot about people that day. One, I started to learn why my dad didn't let me always play with Mark, because Mark would be a little more risky than me. So when it was his idea to put this extension ladder, I thought for a second, and I'm like, no, I'm a man, I can make decisions. So then when I went down, I learned about my neighbor, and I thought the Rotary might have higher standards, because my neighbor came out and he heard the aluminum ladder crashing on the concrete, and he starts laughing and calling me the Griswold family. And then I learned a lot about my wife, because she heard the crash and she came out like 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
So she was like, well, I guess I'll get a new husband.
Yeah. Oh. If you could have heard the sound that he made when he hit the second level, oh my God. I mean, it's like I knew he was okay. But
I'm not a fan of heights either, so that didn't help me. I ripped the gutter off. I ripped the gutter right in half, and I lost the ladder, and I tried to grab it. I don't know how I didn't fall down another level on the concrete.
Yeah, that's better than any the whole thing happened in slow motion, but that's better than any baseball story I've ever been around. I mean, Tim and I spent countless hours in Dunlap Lake, when we were kids. His, parents still do live on Dunlap Lake, I'm guessing. But yeah, I mean, it's, I think that to circle back to what we were talking about in the beginning, that state championship team, to play like Little League baseball in Edwardsville and like walk in that parade, and there were just all these other kids that you grew up playing Little League baseball with and against, and then to have that opportunity to kind of like culminate and get everybody onto one team and to win a state championship. And we didn't have any business. I mean, we had Tommy Price and Joe Blassingame. I mean, that is the biggest defining factor. I mean, those guys pitching with Mike Waldo, calling pitches. I mean, we had an advantage. We could have probably beat some college teams with those guys pitching, but it was pretty special to win that. And, it's amazing is when you get asked about that, like, it's just such a clear, vivid memory, and, something that, always hold really near and dear to my heart.
That's great. And as the same with the St. Louis Blues, since unfortunately the high school baseball season did not happen this year, the Edwardsville Tigers are still reigning state champions.
And rightfully so.
And that'll go on for a while. So
that's so funny. Well, it's good. I see Kai Redman on this call. He's not showing his bald head, and I guess he's ashamed of his bald head now. But a funny story about Kai Redman. So my daughter played soccer with his son, and his son was probably one of the best youth soccer players I've ever seen play. And I think one time he would pass the ball to everybody, and every time he'd pass the ball to somebody, they'd lose it. And so he could just take over a game at any moment. And I can remember being down at the fields at SIU and his son had just scored like his 11th goal. And Kai was like embarrassed. And he said to me, he said, like, whatever, I wish he would pass more. And I said, every time he passes, they lose the ball. I said, if you tell that kid one more time to pass the ball, I'm not coming to these games anymore. I said, he's the only reason why I come to these soccer games is to watch your son play. And I just, remember, I see it's like a very humble person and great people. But I just said, hey, man, if your kid isn't on the field, I'm not watching soccer. So.
Hey, I appreciate it, man, but I think it skipped a generation. So he's a senior this year and then going off to college, but appreciate the comment. Hey, it's great to have you today.
Hey, thank you.
Good to see you. Really good to see you.
Thank you. It's been great being here. It's my second Rotary meeting. I went to a Rotary meeting with Steve Ellsworth, and it's right over by my in-laws' office. I can't even tell you what church it is. I don't know if that's still where Rotary is held.
It is. Yeah, right next door.
So this is my second meeting. So I'm glad that John extended the invite, and anytime I'd love to come back and talk again. So.
Well, yes, welcome back.
Thank you.
And love to have you. So we have we have a minute. Does anybody have any questions? I'm trying to look at the chat just in case. All right. No questions? All right. It was very interesting. Thank you so much. And
who is Tim? I see who is Tim on here. Tim is Tim Funkhauser.
Yes. We had she was late for the meeting. She didn't see that. And I did write.
And not from Edwardsville, sorry.
Okay. Is Brett Grebbing your husband?
Yeah.
Okay. So I sold to your husband back in the day, him and Paulo Bacallo.
Yeah.
And he
you
actually
can refer to him as sugar daddy like I do.
Oh yeah. Oh, so you're in his office.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, but you were in his office because I remember your face.
Yeah.
But he actually, my mom was in Italy and she was on a Segway and ran into a curb and fractured her calcaneus.
I remember this story, yes.
And so your husband fixed her calcaneus. So
very nice.
But anyway, yeah. So I think a lot of him as a surgeon. Anybody's got any issues, he's a good man to go to.
Awesome, thanks.
As you can tell.
Referral.
Yeah, there you go.
As you can tell, and it's been a while, but Mark is an amazing person to have dinner with because there are stories and connections that are all across the board. Now, I'll just leave it at that because we're running out of time. So.
Yeah.
Tina, I have a quick question. It's actually it's of Brian, but for Mark and Tim's benefit. If Brian was out there taking pictures of your ladder incident, Brian, doesn't your wife have a recent picture of you on the ladder and a Three Stooges moment here?
Isn't he in the bucket? In the bucket
No, that's not, I knew what I was doing. That's in the bucket of a tractor, about 15 feet in the air with a chainsaw. And I don't see a problem with that. Now, if Funky would be doing that, I'm sure he'd decapitate himself and there'd be problems.
All right.
That's about how agile he is.
It's amazing how he can reshape stories when I'm trying to find the Zoom on the unmute button on my phone. It's because he's a former president. Doesn't mean that he gets to reshape the whole thing.
Right.
Well,
Well,
if I could interject real quick, it was just such a pleasure growing up with Mark because he was always a great friend. He was always a great trustworthy friend. He was a great guy growing up, to compete with. So if you're playing one-on-one, I got beat a great majority of the time if I ever won a game. But he was always a great teammate, and we had a lot of good players that played. But I think the biggest thing that distinguished ourselves was our competitiveness and also our willingness to enjoy other guys thriving and playing the game and playing together as a team. And I know and as he continued to play professional ball, one of the things that distinguished him was that same competitiveness, but also his ability to blend in a clubhouse that guys are making multi-millions, and he's able to interact with his personality as well as his skills. So I'm sure that translates to the game, and you guys can just tell, like, I don't know what bone you were talking about for his surgery, but every time I talk to him, he's got great knowledge, but he's always such a pleasure to be around. And I'm sure he's great in the medical field too that way. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Funk.
Thanks, Coach.
Yep.
All right, well, if you would, it's time to end the meeting. If you would, please join me in the four-way test. Musanda, do you have that up or are you out? We don't need that. We can just say it ourselves.
Yeah, I have it.
Okay.
Yeah, just 1 minute.
Okay. Thank you again, Mark, and nice to have you, Tim, as our guest.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks, John.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, John, you're almost like a guest sometimes. I hadn't seen you in a while, so it's
I know, it's been a while.
I hear you're back, so I'm
Yep.
glad. All right. What is that?
Can you see it?
I see John, half of John's face.
Oh no. Let's just wait. I'll have it on my screen. But yeah,
Okay, the meaning. We know the words.